hope everybody's back from lunch and ready for some new input. I have the great pleasure of introducing James Kaufman, and I think everybody in this new room knows James Kaufman. If not personally, then for sure from the literature. It's no way to escape his contributions, as he has published an enormous number of, I think, more than 350 papers in the field, more than 45 handbooks that he edited or co-edited or authored. And from his CV, it seems like at least 5 books every year is coming out, and it's so impressive. And at the same time, he's always available for if you contact him, and it surely seems his day has more hours than mine does. So just a very brief background still. He is currently working at the University of Connecticut, and his work covers a broad range of topics ranging from animal cognition to human cognition. From theory, everybody knows 4 C's of creativity, for example, to very applied fields like inequity issues, for example. And he has been the past president of American Psychological Association Division 10, which is the Society for Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts. Also was the co-founder of its prestigious journal, PACA. And he received many awards, including the Torrance Award, every award that APA Division 10 can offer, including Burlight, Farns Award, Arnhem Award. And maybe not everybody knows that besides his scholarly contributions, he's also active in the creative, in the arts domain himself. Like he has written a musical called Discovering Magenta. And so he knows the field from many perspectives and has a hugely comprehensive knowledge of the field. And as such, I think he also knows very well what are the emerging topics in our field, what are potential blind spots, where the field should move maybe in the future, and I hope he might address some of these information in his talk now. Please welcome with me James Kaufman. Blind spots where the field should move maybe in the future, and I hope he might address some of these information in his talk now. Please welcome.
So I have slightly been losing my voice for the last 4 days, but I'm talking, so it's still here. Thank you. Once again, my impulse is to put it in the wrong direction. There we go. So I am going to talk a bit about the 2 biggest issues that have been of interest to me, looking at creativity and new positive outcomes, which include fairness and meaning. I'm going to get there via the 4 C's because that's the only thing I know how to talk about. So of course, creativity, we can define it. New positive outcomes, which include fairness and meaning. The 4 C's are developmental trajectory from mini C, which is the personal insights that you get that are maybe meaningful to you, if not to other people. These are my kids. To little c, the everyday creativity that other people may recognize as being creative, which is the personal insight. To pro C, at which point you're starting to make some type of impact on the domain, you're getting published, you're a little bit of an expert. The everyday creativity that other people may recognize. And then big C, creative genius, typically when you are dead. To pro C, at which point you're starting. I had a student paper this year that said she did not want to be big C because she was afraid she would have to die. And then I'm glad I did not have to be the one to tell her that would happen anyway. So again, developmental trajectory. Mini C goes to little c with feedback, little c to pro C with practice, pro C to big C with time and death. Ron and I are in the middle of reviving and reinvigorating the model. So judging from our progress in the next 30 or 40 years, the revived model should be out. Just to give an example, so mini C, look, my dog comes in, it has burrs on it. And I had this insight that becomes little c when I manufacture a fastening system based on the hooks of the burr and soft loops of the clothing fabric. It becomes pro C as Velcro becomes a big thing. And of course, big C as Velcro slowly becomes our overlords and masters. Burr and soft loops of the clothing fabric. Brief segue into feedback and metacognition. The Goldilocks principle of feedback. Big C as Velcro. You don't want to do too soft because people don't grow. And at a certain point, if all you do is say how, oh my God, you're so creative, they're going to get real feedback and hit the wall. Then, of course, there's also too harsh, which is also not good. You don't want to do too soft because people don't grow. And at a certain point, if all you do is say how, oh my God. Creative metacognition, people need to know when to be creative and how creative they are. Both of these are part of creative metacognition. Sometimes it means learning how to be creative. Sometimes learning when to be creative. So usually we think about creativity and nurturing it, kind of being like Batman, where Batman has the Batmobile and the Batcave and the Batarang and the Bat Butler and all this stuff to help him be more creative, but mostly more superhero-y. But it's important to remember there's also a Superman who was already up here, and he needed to kind of come down and imitate Clark Kent in order to pass as normal so that he wouldn't be driving everybody crazy all the time. And it's that mix of how do we help kids. Not saying we should tell kids don't be creative, but that the super creative kids need to learn skills to help them survive in some classrooms. One thing I briefly addressed in Geneva, in part because I didn't actually read the instructions saying I'd have to be talking, is why creativity? Generally, this is a question that feels a little silly to ask here because we're all here to talk about creativity. But if you think about it, creativity uses a lot of resources, time, money, things that we like. Well, most of us like time. Certainly all of us like money. Whenever you're focusing on creativity in schools or in the workplace, it means that you're not focusing on something else. We use big C as the great rationalization, that we need to improve creativity because we'll get that Steve Jobs, Bill Gates type person who will invent Windows 17 and make the world a better place. Obviously, there is a certain degree of truth to that. We're having this conference in Marconi's house, lab, birthplace, home. All right, I like that. So obviously, the idea of Big C, we're having this conference in a place of Big C, which is kind of awesome. But I argue it's more than that. Because generally people will agree they like Big C. Most people will not argue, I hate super incredible important creativity. But people say they like all kinds of creativity. Teachers, bosses, the public, they usually will think they do. Often when it comes down to it, they don't. Most new products fail. We like things better if they exist. So if you're just comparing two products, this one exists, this is hypothetical, people prefer the one that exists. People like the status quo. People like rooting for the Yankees. My dad roots for the Yankees. Until they began losing, but now he's back to rooting for them. About, 3 years ago, Marie and I did a paper where we looked at, does the research focus on what predicts creativity, or what creativity predicts. So in other words, if we look at what predicts creativity, we have, cognitive variables, personality variables, situational variables, etc. This is all super, super important. There's also the idea, well, what does creativity predict? Can we answer that why question? Are creative people more likely to be successful or to get good jobs or to have good dental hygiene? We need to know this stuff. What we found out is that almost all the papers, 70%, focused on what predicts creativity. Of those papers, not in the 70%, they tended to focus on one of two things: school and work outcomes. And these are important. So they would find, look, creativity is linked with GPA at this amount. And that's good. 0.22 is good. I mean, it's generally the average correlation of, I think, any two things in the entire world. And indeed, conscientiousness is correlated 0.43 with GPA. They talk about the workplace, creativity being associated with workplace success. And again, this is true, but intelligence and conscientiousness are much more associated with workplace success. So then we have this, okay, conscientious people, they're organized, they're hardworking, they play well with others. Nobody has any negative stereotypes about conscientious people. Maybe they're a little anal, but that's about it. Creative people, these things up here, sloppy, less loyal, disruptive, these are the purely, there have been studies on this, and this isn't even controversial. I'm not going into all the cesspool of the generally false mental illness connection, which is generally false, but people still think. So how do we convince the people who actually make decisions that we should do creativity stuff? Because in the real world, if we want to have creativity be important, the people who make decisions and the people who have money need to be convinced. My argument is to expand our choice of outcome measures. I'm going to focus on, as I mentioned, two. These are not the only two. They're the two I'm prepared to talk about today. Somewhat prepared. I'm still kind of battling this weird little fevery thing. So one is equity and fairness, and the other is the meaning of life. And if you think that people kind of laugh at you when you say that you look at creativity, now imagine saying you look at creativity and the meaning of life. Just try doing that. Try to do it with a straight face, even to friends. So in terms of the fairness equity issue, there's a stream of research that has been growing largely out of Europe. Creative people tend to be less likely to stereotype, and the people who do stereotype tend to not be creative. And this kind of makes sense if you think of what is associated with being creative, being open to new experiences. That means that you're willing to listen to things. It means that you'll try new things. You'll debate ideas. Challenge yourself. These are all things that are associated, yes, with creativity, also with somebody who may be less likely to be intolerant. There's also things like cognitive flexibility, perspective taking. A number of these characteristics of creativity are characteristics of somebody who is more likely to be tolerant. Tolerant of ambiguity, tolerant of other people, and that is absolutely brilliant, by the way, in terms of perspective taking. Meanwhile, by getting people to challenge stereotypes, you can increase their creativity. And they've done this at all levels, so stuff like, a hippie lawyer, and getting people to think about that. they'll be more creative. And that interventions that they do to increase tolerance can also be found to increase creativity. This is much more of a US thing, so I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on it. But in the United States, we have the SATs or the GREs or the AP tests, the ACTs or the MCATs or the LSATs, or all of these various standardized tests that largely determine our entire future. They were originally intended to be part of this nutritious breakfast, where there's the standardized test and there's GPA, letters of recommendation, maybe a portfolio of work, personal statement, and all sorts of things like that to determine who gets into gifted programs or college or graduate school. Instead, you get this. Most American colleges look at the SATs, maybe GPA. These tests generally show differences by things that you don't want to see differences in. The reasons behind this can be debated for a long time, and I'm going to skirt over them for now. Or maybe I won't. I will say that if you look at creativity tests, differences by ethnicity, gender, largely culture, are either reduced or they're non-existent. Sometimes, particularly for self-assessment, they are reversed. Groups that are underrepresented, groups that often do not receive as high scores on traditional standardized measures, creativity, the tests tend to be much more equitable and fair for these groups. I'm not suggesting we throw out standardized tests. That won't happen. But if we were to supplement existing tests, and some places do, Tufts tried it for a while when Bob Sternberg was there. Gene Pretz at Elizabethtown has been doing that a little bit. If we can add a little bit of creativity, you tend to find that later classes are more diverse, highlight new people. They are not lower in SAT scores, but they are much more diverse, much more showing different strengths. Another positive outcome that I was surprised to find there's been not a whole lot on, a little bit, is on the link between creativity and meaning of life. I mean, mostly when I began to look into it, I was kind of excited to find that people were still studying the meaning of life, because I read Man's Search for Meaning in college and hadn't really thought about any of it since. And indeed, Man's Search for Meaning, back in the late 40s, early 50s, Viktor Frankl, and he argued, proposed these kind of three concepts: that you could create a work or do an activity that could give you meaning, it could be through an experience, a personal connection, or finally, through the experience and the way that you face inevitable suffering. This third one is generally less included in models of meaning. Robert Jay Lifton, who came a little bit later, built on this work, and he argues the thing that we have to deal with, we know we're going to die. If you think about your pets, I have 3 dogs. I have an almost 15-year-old Corgi Dachshund mix who's largely incontinent, wears a diaper, has back issues. He does not know he's going to die. He has no clue. I don't know if he assumes that everything's just going to clear up. I don't know anything he thinks. I'm vaguely convinced that every time I come home, he thinks, I don't know who this guy is, but he seems pretty cool. But he has no idea he's going to die. We, however, we get to know that. How do we not go crazy all the time, if you think about it, knowing we're going to die? Most of my talks are exactly this cheery, by the way. What Lifton proposes is the idea of symbolic immortality. We are not immortal, but we can do something that stays immortal, has a certain immortality to it. One way is kids. One way is this physical matter idea, like Carl Sagan and your body being part of the universe and billions of atoms. There's spirituality, religion. Notice the word creativity is a number 4. But the idea that your creativity, your work, your mentorship will continue on. And then again, as with Frankl, the idea of optimal experiences, peak experiences, living life to its fullest. So in more recent years, Martella and Steger have synthesized a lot of this stuff into 3 core points: coherence, significance, and purpose. So coherence, do you understand why your life has evolved the way it has? Do you understand your past decisions? People with low coherence will often feel like their life has kind of just happened and they can't explain what's happened and they don't know why they've done things and it's been a series of random, unfair events. People with high coherence, it doesn't mean they've made good decisions their whole life. Nobody has. But they understand it. And they understand where they are, and they're okay with it. Significance. Does your life have value? Is it a life worth living? And purpose. Are there things that keep driving you? Do you still have goals no matter where you are in life? So to connect this to creativity. Now, originally I wanted to call this model the ghosts of creativity, past, present, and future, but some editors have no sense of humor, so it's a temporal model of creativity and meaning. That said, if you've looked at the names of some of my past articles and theories, it was probably a good call on their part. So coherence and creativity. Again, the past, looking backwards. This encompasses a number of different creative activities. Probably the top one is the idea of the writing cure, which probably many of you know, that regularly expressively writing expressively. And this could be writing a narrative or a blog. It could be writing a novel, because fiction counts as long as there is a narrative of some type. If you engage in expressive writing, and they've done so many of these studies, it began with James Pennebaker, but so much other work, the amount of positive things feels like something you hear from a game show in terms of better physical health, better mental health, less high-risk behavior, all sorts of amazing good things that happen if you regularly write expressively. One of the ideas is that the narrative aspect kind of cleans up your brain. It reduces cognitive load, and you have more space in your brain to do other things, generally positive things. There's a lot of the idea of creativity and post-traumatic growth, a lot of the work that Marie Forgiard and other people have been doing about how people who are more creative can sometimes use that creativity to grow out of traumatic experiences. And I know she and her colleagues have done work in Sri Lanka, Rwanda. Somebody else has done some work on her after Hurricane Katrina. This area is kind of still just starting, but there's some amazing potential for the work here. And similarly, memoirs, later in life creativity. Significance and creativity. I mean, anytime you start talking about optimal experience, you're probably thinking flow. And just the fact that creativity should be fun. If you're creative, hopefully, you're enjoying it. That's a huge part of it. But there's other stuff. There's the museum effect by Jeff Smith, where if you look at people going into museums, and he mostly studied art museums, but I have no idea if it's true for other ones, but certainly for art museums, if you look at how much people feel connected to other people when they enter an art museum, it's usually about here. It's not a number, it's more just a place. Then you ask them halfway through, and it's all the way up here, and it does regress back a little bit, but it's still notably higher. Being with other people and experiencing creative works makes you feel more connected to those people. Some of the work in meaning looks at the idea of terror management theory, or looks at the idea that we can understand meaning of life if we make people think about death. And that often is not very creativity friendly, because they argue that when people are thinking about death, they want community, they don't want creativity. But creativity can be community. And I think it's a very narrow understanding of creativity for that particular argument. Similarly, there's a lot of work on art participation and creative activities in older adults. It has been shown to help stave off dementia, to increase well-being, to help adults, older adults with dementia, maintain cognitive status longer. Oh, I'm so glad it didn't spill them. Oh no. We don't need glasses. No.
Too fast. What can I do now? Alternative uses of this.
How many? Okay, so what can you do with that?
Many things.
Is it dynamic the way that you do it? And then art therapy. A lot of Ellen Winter and her former students work on that, with the idea that art improves mood in large part because it makes you think about doing art, and that's fun. So that your mood improves because you're not thinking about bad stuff. It's a little bit the opposite of the expressive writing cure. They both help, but for different reasons. And then purpose and creativity, symbolic immortality. The big thing for me is this idea of leaving a creative legacy. And this is across all 4 C's. So at the pro C or big C level, it's a little more obvious in terms of wanting to create something for future generations. But it's at all levels. My grandma painted. She was not a good painter. I mean, really, I'm not being self-deprecating. But I loved my grandma, and she still painted flowers, and there were colors, and it was pretty. And after she passed, we got 2 of her paintings of flowers, and we happened then later when we were traveling to pick up 2 much higher quality paintings, matching those colors, and my wife, I have no taste, paired them together. And so every day I go into the living room and I see these 2 paintings by my grandma, and they're colorful and they're pretty, and I don't necessarily think they would do well in a consensual assessment technique, but they make me happy, and it makes me think of her, and it is, when she was painting later in life, I'm sure that was everything that she would have dreamed would have happened to her paintings. Not like the other grandma who also painted, but we don't like her. I think the idea of identity development, simply discovering who you are, that itself is a creative process. And figuring out who am I going to be, what am I going to do over my career, these are all these decisions that are future focused, that are towards this purpose, and as you get older, particularly towards this symbolic immortality. So what I would love would be to actually test these questions more. Can creativity tests increase fairness at admissions? We are doing some work on that. And in general about creativity and fairness, and looking at what aspects of creativity, how does it work? A number of these different studies are on board. And I'm very interested in this stuff if anybody has access. Can creativity help people find meaning in their lives? Again, a couple of these studies in the mix. And beyond that, I did a special target article for Matrix Journal, Creativity That. Say it one more time, but louder.
Creativity theories, research, and application.
Yes. Theory, research, and applications. So Maciek Karwowski has a great journal, Creativity, Theory, Research, and Applications. I did a Target article that had some responses, including several people here. The idea of what else could be a positive outcome to look at for creativity. And we got some good suggestions. I'm hoping that we're going to do a second issue with some more ideas. But what else can we look at beyond GPA and work performance? What else can creativity do? And I'm happy to take questions if there is time.
Any questions? We have time.
I'm Steve Dean from Acceptance Group Company. I liked your point about creativity being something to improve equity. You also mentioned it's a way to get CEOs to care about creativity. But I guess in most of my experience, CEOs care a little bit more about the bottom line. So have you seen good ways to connect creativity and equity to the bottom line?
Certainly, there's been some work on team diversity that indicates that having diversity in the workplace will have a positive effect on the bottom line. It tends to take a longer-term view, and some CEOs are good at that and some are not. I think that the equity argument often is a little stronger for colleges and education. I would hope for CEOs also. I do think there would be a bottom line implication based on this team diversity and having the right level of task conflict increase the creativity of a product. That's a nuanced idea. My guess is the type of CEO who wouldn't grasp that nuance probably wouldn't be interested, but I'm hoping others would. Is that fair?
Thank you. That was such an amazingly inspiring presentation. And I'm really like to take you back to your creativity and meaning of life question, because we put a lot of this work into our curriculum. And I'm wondering if there might be a connection, or whether you see any connection between whole being, creativity being able to connect the different parts of our being. Because I'm interested in whole beings presenting, students coming as whole beings, not leaving their femininity, spirituality, whatever at home, but presenting as whole being, and academics too, when they're teaching, to kind of model this. And I'm thinking of the work of Csikszentmihalyi, where the extreme knowing and not knowing, the extreme personality types, if creativity does help you hold those extremes all in one person, that idea of whole being would be very naturally aligned to the meaning of life and purpose.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one reason why the identity development part resonated quite a bit, because I feel like so many of the core decisions in our life and these crossroads in our life, not just identity development, but what are we going to do for a career? What are the major decisions we make? Creativity is part of that. And it's so much. I mean, my former mentor would always say creativity is a choice. It's a way of life. Do you want to live that way or not? And that it permeates things. It's everything from the mundane, and do you make this meal a little more interesting? Do you play with your kids a little more strangely? That came off wrong. But there is, I mean, as Csikszentmihalyi kind of beautifully articulated all of these things that creative people, they're this and they're that, they're this and they're that. And it's the ability to feel these very extreme things that are often in conflict and not fully in alignment. It makes life fuller. I mean, not necessarily easier, but fuller and more interesting, which in some ways is the highest compliment I can give anything.
Thank you, James. It's always so nice to listen to you talking about this topic. I was wondering the definition of creativity that Batman was slapping Robin with, right? So novelty, task appropriate. Would you think that we should be thinking as a community of including meaningfulness within that definition? Would that be something to do, or the curiosity of mine?
I'm always scared of adding requirements because one of the things that's always fascinated me has, in addition to mini-C, has been the idea of replication in the propulsion model, finding creativity in these often mundane or even uninteresting places, and finding the creativity of, well, hidden or shadow creativity, you might say. Anything that would risk having certain things be labeled not creative, I would be wary of, but I would agree that as part of this peak creativity, I think meaningful would be part of that. And it is important to note that mini-C starts with a personally meaningful insight.
Hi, James.
Hi, Tim.
I was doing some reading, went to a conference last year on self-determination theory, and you mentioned the word creativity to people. This is a broad sweeping generalisation for which I apologise. They don't really know much about the creativity world, and just watching that presentation, it made me realise I think that things like that are so egocentric that autonomy, connectedness and purpose are the absolute divine right of the individual. It strikes me from listening to this part of your talk that you would see creativity as far more benevolent than that. Would that be a reasonable thing to suggest? Benevolent.
I'm scared of the word benevolent, but yes. Certainly in reading a lot of the meaning literature, which is not that far off from a lot of the self-determination theory stuff, the thing that struck me the most was that creativity just wasn't there. It wasn't that they said, oh, it's not related. They just, I'm not sure they were fully aware it existed. And so a lot of my leaps began, okay, well, this word could be related to creativity, stuff like that. Certainly I think that a lot of the things that they would not think of as creativity but are related, like openness and things like that, would fall into some of their structures. But as we know, creativity is not always welcomed into new fields. So, I mean, one of the few papers I found that beautifully integrated it was a recent paper by Teresa Amable and Michael Pratt that looked at work orientation, creativity, and meaning. That was brilliant, and I highly recommend it, and both were incredibly generous with their time and answering very stupid questions I had.
Oh, thank you very much for your talk, James. And what I'm interested in is on which is the relationship between the three part of your temporal model, the past, the present, and the future. How are they related? Are they linearly, incrementally related, or non-linearly? In the sense that the creativity in the future can also determine or cause a difference in the creativity in the past?
They're definitely related. If for no other reason, then it took me about 5 talks to not mix them up. I think there are a lot of ways that creativity and meaning fold onto each other that slide against two of them. So for example, the same stuff that's future-oriented and purpose-driven, like I want to leave something for my kids and I'm going to write a memoir, but in writing that memoir, I'll be working on coherence and understanding my life, and while doing that, I will be enjoying it and experiencing some significance. I absolutely think they are related in that way, that these same actions can double dip, so to speak. I would love to see more. As in, I've just started doing some work on this, like actual empirical research, and I'm very, very curious what there is to find.
Do we have more questions? So, thanks again, James, for this inspiring talk.